The screams had finally stopped 3 months ago, but Adelaide Voss still heard them every time she closed her eyes at night in her small boarding room above the general store in Pecos, Texas. It was May of 1877, and the morning sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty streets as Adelaide made her way to the Wells family ranch where she had secured work as a seamstress and occasional cook. Her worn cotton dress had sleeves that reached past her wrists despite the sweltering heat, the fabric clinging uncomfortably to her skin as she walked the 2 miles from town. Other women passed her wearing shorter sleeves, fanning themselves against the oppressive warmth, but Adelaide kept her arms covered no matter the temperature. She had learned to endure the discomfort because the alternative was worse. The ranch came into view, a sprawling property with a main house, several outbuildings, and endless stretches of land where cattle grazed. Adelaide had been working there for nearly a month now, ever since she had arrived in Pecos with nothing but the clothes on her back and enough money for 3 nights in a boarding house. Mrs. Wells, a kind woman in her 50s with graying hair and a gentle smile, had taken pity on her and offered her steady work without asking too many questions about where she had come from or why she had arrived alone. Adelaide was grateful for that silence. She did not want to explain the scars that covered her forearms, the raised and puckered flesh that told a story she wished she could forget. The fire had taken everything from her, her parents, her younger brother, and nearly her own life. She had been visiting her aunt in Austin when the fire broke out at her family's farm near San Antonio, started by a knocked-over lantern in the barn that spread faster than anyone could have imagined. By the time Adelaide had received word and made the journey home, there was nothing left but ash and 3 graves that the neighbors had dug. She had tried to save them. The moment she had arrived and seen the flames, something inside her had broken, and she had run toward the burning structure, desperate to find someone, anyone still alive. The neighbors had pulled her back, but not before the flames had caught her sleeves, searing her skin as she fought against their grip. The physical scars were a permanent reminder of her failure, of arriving too late to make a difference. As Adelaide approached the ranch house, she noticed a tall figure standing near the corral, working with a spirited chestnut horse. She had seen him before from a distance, one of the ranch hands who seemed to spend more time with the animals than with people. Mrs. Wells had mentioned him in passing, a man named Vincent Reeves who had drifted into Pecos about 6 months ago and proven himself to be one of the finest horsemen she had ever seen. Adelaide kept her head down as she walked toward the house, not wanting to draw attention to herself. She had grown accustomed to being invisible, to moving through spaces without leaving much of an impression. It was safer that way, easier to avoid the questions and the pitying looks that came when people learned too much about her past. "Morning," a deep voice called out, startling her from her thoughts. Adelaide glanced up to see Vincent Reeves walking toward her, leading the chestnut horse by a rope. He was tall and lean, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that fell just past his collar. His eyes were a striking shade of green, bright against his tanned face, and there was something in his expression that seemed both guarded and curious at the same time. "Good morning," Adelaide replied quietly, clutching the basket she carried with both hands. Inside were the mending project's Mrs. Wells had given her to complete at home, along with some fresh bread she had purchased from the baker in town. "You are the new seamstress, right?" Vincent asked, stopping a respectful distance away. The horse behind him snorted and tossed its head, but he held the rope steady without even looking back. "Yes, Adelaide Voss," she said, offering a small nod. "I have been working here for about a month now." "Vincent Reeves," he said, touching the brim of his hat in greeting. "Though most folks just call me Vince. That is a mighty long walk from town in this heat. You making that trek every day?" "Most days," Adelaide confirmed. "It is not so bad once you get used to it." Vincent studied her for a moment, his green eyes thoughtful. "I reckon anything can become bearable if you have no other choice," he said. And there was something in his tone that suggested he understood more about that concept than most people. Before Adelaide could respond, Mrs. Wells emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. "Adelaide, there you are. Come on inside, dear. I've got quite a pile of work for you today." "Vince, how is that horse coming along?" "She is getting there," Vincent replied, glancing back at the chestnut mare. "Still got some fire in her, but she is starting to trust me. Give me another week and she will be ready to ride." "Excellent," Mrs. Wells said with satisfaction. "Mr. Wells is very eager to get her trained. She cost him a pretty penny at auction." She turned back to Adelaide. "Come along, dear. Let us get you out of this heat." Adelaide followed Mrs. Wells into the house, grateful for the shade and the slight breeze that came through the open windows. The interior was comfortable and well kept, with handmade quilts draped over the furniture and family photographs arranged on the mantel above the fireplace. "I have several of Mr. Wells's shirts that need buttons replaced," Mrs. Wells explained, leading Adelaide to a sewing room off the main parlor. "And there is a dress of mine that needs the hem let out. I am afraid I have been enjoying my own cooking a bit too much lately." She laughed, patting her stomach good-naturedly. Adelaide smiled and set to work, losing herself in the familiar rhythm of needle and thread. Sewing had always brought her comfort, the repetitive motions allowing her mind to quiet and focus on something tangible and achievable. She could fix a torn seam or replace a button, small acts of repair that felt meaningful in a world where so much seemed broken beyond fixing. The morning passed quickly, and around midday, Mrs. Wells brought her a plate of cold chicken and biscuits along with a glass of water. "You work too hard, dear," she said kindly. "You need to take proper breaks and keep your strength up." "Thank you, Mrs. Wells," Adelaide said, setting aside the shirt she had been working on. "You are very generous." "Nonsense," Mrs. Wells replied, settling into a chair across from her. "You do good work and you are reliable. That is worth more than gold out here." She paused, studying Adelaide with a thoughtful expression. "Are you not terribly warm in those long sleeves? I have some dresses with shorter sleeves that might fit you if you would like to try them." Adelaide felt her stomach tighten with anxiety. "No, thank you," she said quickly. "I am quite comfortable as I am. I have always been sensitive to the sun, so I prefer to keep covered." It was not entirely a lie. Her scarred skin was more sensitive to sunlight than it had been before the burns, but that was not the real reason she kept herself covered. She simply could not bear the thought of anyone seeing the damage, of watching their expressions change from friendliness to pity or worse, to disgust. Mrs. Wells did not press the issue, though Adelaide could see the concern in her eyes. "Well, if you change your mind, the offer stands," she said gently before leaving Adelaide to finish her meal in peace. The afternoon brought more sewing, and Adelaide was so absorbed in her work that she did not notice the hours passing until the light coming through the windows began to take on the golden quality of early evening. Mrs. Wells appeared in the doorway with her payment for the week, a small pouch of coins that felt substantial in Adelaide's hand. "Same time tomorrow?" Mrs. Wells asked. "Yes, madam," Adelaide confirmed, carefully tucking the money into her basket. As she stepped out of the house, Adelaide noticed that the heat of the day had finally begun to ease, though the walk back to town still promised to be uncomfortable in her long sleeves. She had barely made it past the corral when Vincent appeared, leading a saddled horse. "Hold on a minute," he called out, walking toward her. "You are heading back to town, right?" "Yes," Adelaide said, stopping uncertainly. "Let me give you a ride," Vincent offered. "It is too far to walk in this heat, and it is on my way anyway. I need to pick up some supplies at the feed store before it closes." Adelaide hesitated, not used to accepting help from anyone, especially not from men she barely knew. But the thought of the long walk in the oppressive heat made her practical nature override her reluctance. "If it is not too much trouble," she said quietly. "No trouble at all," Vincent assured her. He mounted the horse in one fluid motion, then extended his hand down to her. "Put your foot in the stirrup and I will pull you up." Adelaide did as he instructed, and a moment later she was seated behind him, her basket balanced on her lap. She held onto the back of the saddle with one hand, trying to maintain as much distance as possible while still remaining secure. "You can hold on to me if you need to," Vincent said over his shoulder as the horse began to move. "I promise I do not bite." Despite herself, Adelaide felt a small smile tug at her lips. There was something genuine about Vincent's manner, a straightforward quality that put her slightly more at ease. Still, she kept her grip on the saddle, not quite ready to trust even that small amount of additional closeness. They rode in silence for a while, the rhythmic clip-clop of the horses, hooves on the packed earth the only sound between them. The landscape around Pecos was harsh and beautiful in equal measure, all rolling plains and endless sky, with the Pecos River winding its way through the terrain like a lifeline in the desert. "How long have you been working at the ranch?" Adelaide asked, feeling like she should make some attempt at conversation. "About 6 months now," Vincent replied. "I had been drifting for a while before that, working ranches all over Texas and New Mexico. Mr. Wells offered me steady work and fair pay, so I decided to stay put for a while." "Where are you from originally?" Adelaide asked, then immediately regretted the question. She did not like when people pried into her past, and she should not be doing the same to him, but Vincent did not seem bothered by the question. "Kansas, originally," he said. "But I left there when I was about 17. That was nearly 8 years ago now. I have been moving around ever since." "What made you leave?" The words were out before Adelaide could stop them, her curiosity getting the better of her usual reserve. Vincent was quiet for a moment, and Adelaide thought she had overstepped. But then he spoke, his voice carrying a weight that suggested old wounds not quite healed. "My father and I did not see eye to eye on much of anything. He had a particular idea of how I should live my life, and when I chose a different path, he made it clear I was not welcome anymore. So I left, and I have not been back since." "I am sorry," Adelaide said softly, recognizing the pain in his words even if he tried to keep his tone casual. "It is what it is," Vincent said with a slight shrug. "We cannot choose our family, but we can choose what we do with the life we have been given. What about you? You do not sound like you are from Texas originally." Adelaide tensed, not wanting to share too much but also not wanting to seem rude after he had opened up to her. "I was born in Missouri," she said carefully, "but my family moved to Texas when I was young. My parents had a farm near San Antonio." She stopped there, not ready to say more. Vincent seemed to sense her reluctance and did not push for additional details. They rode the rest of the way into town in a companionable silence, and Adelaide found herself feeling grateful for his discretion. When they reached the general store where Adelaide boarded in the rooms above, Vincent brought the horse to a stop and helped her down. "Thank you for the ride," Adelaide said, clutching her basket. "I appreciate your kindness." "Any time," Vincent said, tipping his hat to her. "I will probably see you tomorrow at the ranch." Adelaide nodded and watched as he rode off toward the feed store, feeling an unfamiliar flutter in her chest that she quickly tried to dismiss. She could not afford to develop feelings for anyone, not when she was still so broken inside, not when the scars on her arms were a constant reminder of everything she had lost. That night, as Adelaide lay in her small room listening to the sounds of the town settling down for the evening, she found herself thinking about Vincent Reeves and the way his green eyes had seemed to look at her like she was a person worth noticing, not just someone to be pitied or overlooked. It was a dangerous feeling, that small spark of connection, and Adelaide knew she should extinguish it before it had a chance to grow into something more. But as she drifted off to sleep, her last thoughts were of sitting behind him on that horse, the solid warmth of his presence, and the unexpected comfort of not feeling quite so alone for those few brief moments. The following weeks fell into a comfortable pattern. Adelaide continued her work at the Wells Ranch, and more often than not, Vincent would offer her a ride back to town in the evenings. At first, Adelaide protested, not wanting to be a burden, but Vincent had waved off her concerns with an easy smile. "You are not taking me out of my way," he had said. "And besides, I like the company. It gets lonely talking to horses all day, even if they are better listeners than most people I have met." Adelaide had laughed at that, a genuine laugh that surprised them both. She could not remember the last time she had felt light enough for laughter, and the sound of it was foreign to her own ears. As June arrived and the heat intensified, Adelaide found herself looking forward to those evening rides more than she wanted to admit. Vincent had a way of talking that made her feel at ease, sharing stories about the horses he worked with or observations about life on the ranch, without ever demanding that she share more than she was comfortable giving. One particularly sweltering afternoon, Adelaide was working in the sewing room when she heard raised voices coming from outside. She set down her needle and moved to the window, peering out to see Vincent in the corral with a large black stallion that was clearly agitated. The horse was rearing and kicking, and even from this distance, Adelaide could see the tension in Vincent's body as he tried to maintain control of the rope. Mr. Wells was standing outside the corral fence, shouting instructions that Adelaide could not quite make out. The stallion reared again, and this time the rope slipped from Vincent's hands. The horse bolted toward the fence, and Adelaide's heart leaped into her throat as she saw Vincent dive to the side, narrowly avoiding being trampled. Without thinking, Adelaide ran from the room and out of the house, her basket forgotten on the floor. By the time she reached the corral, Vincent was back on his feet, dusting himself off while Mr. Wells had managed to corner the agitated stallion. "Are you all right?" Adelaide called out, her voice higher than usual with worry. Vincent turned to look at her, surprise evident on his face. "I am fine," he assured her, walking over to the fence. "Just got a little too confident, I think. That horse is not ready to be pushed yet." Adelaide could see a tear in his shirt where he had hit the ground, and there was dust covering him from head to toe, but he seemed genuinely unharmed. Still, her heart was racing, and she gripped the fence rail tightly to steady herself. "You should be more careful," she said, hearing the tremor in her own voice and hating it. "You could have been seriously hurt." Something shifted in Vincent's expression as he looked at her, a softness entering his eyes. "I did not know you cared," he said gently, and there was no teasing in his tone, just a quiet observation. Adelaide felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the sun. "Of course I care," she said, then quickly amended. "I would care if anyone was in danger. It is only natural." "Sure," Vincent agreed, but the small smile playing at the corners of his mouth suggested he heard what she had not said as much as what she had. That evening, as they rode back toward town, Adelaide finally worked up the courage to ask a question that had been on her mind for weeks. "Why did you start working with horses?" Vincent was quiet for a moment, and Adelaide could feel him considering his answer. "They make sense to me," he finally said. "Horses are honest. If they trust you, they show it. If they are scared or angry, they let you know. There is no pretending, no saying one thing and meaning another. I like that kind of straightforwardness." "People can be honest too," Adelaide said, though even as the words left her mouth, she recognized the hypocrisy. She was hiding so much from everyone around her, keeping her scars and her past locked away where no one could see. "Some can," Vincent agreed, "but I have found it to be rarer than it should be. Most folks are so busy trying to be what they think others want them to be that they forget who they really are underneath all that pretending." His words hit closer to home than Adelaide wanted to acknowledge. Was that not exactly what she was doing? Hiding behind long sleeves and carefully constructed walls, afraid to let anyone see the truth of who she was and what she had been through. "That sounds lonely," Adelaide said softly. "It can be," Vincent admitted, "but I reckon we are all lonely in our own ways. The trick is finding someone who makes that loneliness a little less heavy to carry." Adelaide did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing, and they rode the rest of the way in silence. But something had shifted between them, a deeper understanding that both excited and terrified her in equal measure. July brought a celebration to Pecos in the form of the annual Independence Day festivities. Mrs. Wells had given Adelaide the day off, encouraging her to attend the events in town. But Adelaide had initially planned to spend the day in her room, not comfortable with crowds or the inevitable questions that came with social gatherings. But on the morning of the 4th, there was a knock on her door. When Adelaide opened it, she found Vincent standing in the hallway, hat in hand, looking slightly uncertain. "Good morning," he said. "I was hoping I could convince you to come to the festivities with me today." Adelaide's first instinct was to refuse, to make up some excuse about being tired or having other obligations. But looking at Vincent, at the hopeful expression on his face and the way he was turning his hat nervously in his hands, she found herself wanting to say yes, despite her fears. "I am not much for crowds," she said hesitantly. "We do not have to stay in the thick of things," Vincent assured her. "We can watch the horse races from a distance and maybe grab some food from the vendors. No pressure to socialize if you do not want to." The fact that he understood her reluctance without her having to explain it made Adelaide's decision easier. "All right," she agreed, "but if it becomes too much, I will need to leave." "Fair enough," Vincent said, his face breaking into a genuine smile. "I will meet you downstairs in an hour." Adelaide nodded and closed the door, immediately wondering what she had just agreed to. But as she changed into her nicest dress, still with long sleeves despite the heat, she found herself looking forward to spending the day with Vincent, to having a normal experience like other women her age instead of always hiding away. The town square was decorated with red, white, and blue bunting, and there were vendors selling everything from meat pies to sweet candies. The smell of roasting meat and fresh bread filled the air, and children ran through the streets laughing and playing games. A small band had set up near the church, playing patriotic songs that Adelaide vaguely remembered from her childhood. True to his word, Vincent kept them on the outskirts of the main celebrations, finding spots where they could observe without being overwhelmed by the crowds. They watched the horse races from a small hill overlooking the makeshift track, and Adelaide found herself genuinely enjoying Vincent's commentary as he explained the finer points of horsemanship and predicted which riders would place. "You see that bay horse in the 3rd position," Vincent said, pointing. His rider is holding him back too much. The horse wants to run, but he is not being given the freedom to do it. Now that black horse up front, he and his rider are working together. That is what makes the difference. How can you tell all that from here? Adelaide asked, impressed despite herself. You watch enough horses and you start to pick up on the small things, Vincent said with a shrug. Body language, the way they move, how responsive they are to their rider. It is like reading a story if you know what to look for. As the day wore on, Adelaide felt some of the constant tension she carried begin to ease. Vincent made her laugh with his observations about the townspeople and his stories from various ranches he had worked. He was attentive without being overbearing, seeming to sense when she needed space and when she was comfortable with him being closer. They were sharing a plate of fried chicken when a group of young women walked past, giggling and whispering among themselves. Adelaide recognized a few of them from the general store, daughters of prominent families in Pecos who always seemed to have the latest fashions and the most carefree attitudes. One of them, a blonde girl named Margaret, stopped and smiled at Vincent. "Hello, Vince," she said in a honeyed tone. "Are you enjoying the festivities?" "I am, thank you," Vincent replied politely but without much enthusiasm. Margaret's eyes slid over to Adelaide, and Adelaide could see the assessment happening, the way the girl's gaze lingered on her unfashionable long sleeves and plain dress. "I do not believe we have met," Margaret said, though her tone suggested she had no real interest in making Adelaide's acquaintance. "Adelaide Voss," Adelaide said quietly, not meeting the girl's eyes. "Oh, you are the seamstress," Margaret said, as if that explained everything. "How nice that Vince is keeping you company." The implication was clear, that Vincent was performing some act of charity rather than genuinely wanting to spend time with her. Adelaide felt her cheeks burn with humiliation, and she set down the piece of chicken she had been eating, her appetite suddenly gone. "Actually," Vincent said, his voice taking on an edge Adelaide had never heard before, "Adelaide is doing me the favor by agreeing to spend the day with me." "I am lucky she said yes. Now if you will excuse us, we were in the middle of a conversation." Margaret's smile faltered, and she exchanged glances with her friends before hurrying off with a dismissive toss of her hair. "I am sorry about that," Vincent said once they were out of earshot. "Some people do not know how to mind their own business." "She is right, though," Adelaide said, staring down at her hands. "You could be spending the day with someone more suitable, someone like her who dresses properly and knows how to be social and charming." "Adelaide, look at me," Vincent said gently. When she did not immediately comply, he reached out and carefully tilted her chin up with his finger until their eyes met. "I have no interest in spending time with Margaret or anyone like her. I asked you to come with me today because I wanted to be with you. Not out of pity or obligation, but because I genuinely enjoy your company. Do you understand that?" Adelaide wanted to believe him, but years of feeling broken and unworthy made it difficult to accept that someone like Vincent could truly want to be around her. "Why?" she whispered. "I am not good company. I am too quiet and too damaged, and I cannot even wear short sleeves like a normal person." The words were out before she could stop them, and Adelaide immediately regretted revealing so much. She tried to look away, but Vincent's hand remained gentle but firm on her chin. "You are good company because you are real," Vincent said with quiet intensity. "You do not put on airs or pretend to be something you are not. And I do not give a damn what length sleeves you wear. That is your choice and yours alone, and it does not make you any less worthwhile." Tears pricked at Adelaide's eyes, but she blinked them back, not wanting to make a scene in public. "You do not know what you are saying," she managed to get out. "I know exactly what I am saying," Vincent countered, "and I mean every word." They sat in silence for a few minutes, Adelaide trying to compose herself while Vincent waited patiently beside her. Finally, she took a shaky breath and turned to face him fully. "There was a fire," she said quietly, the words coming out in a rush before she could second-guess herself. "3 months ago. My parents and my younger brother died. I tried to save them, but I was too late. I got burned trying to get into the house. That is why I wear long sleeves. The scars are ugly and I do not want people to see them." Vincent's expression shifted to one of deep compassion, but there was no pity in his eyes, just understanding and sadness for what she had endured. "Adelaide, I am so sorry," he said. "I cannot imagine how painful that must have been and still is." "I should have been there," Adelaide said, and now the tears did fall, sliding down her cheeks despite her best efforts to hold them back. "If I had not been visiting my aunt, if I had been home, maybe I could have done something. Maybe they would still be alive." "Or maybe you would have died too," Vincent said gently. "You cannot know what would have happened, and torturing yourself with what ifs will not bring them back. I know that is easier said than believed, but it is the truth." Adelaide wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand, aware that people were probably staring but too overwhelmed to care anymore. "I feel so broken," she admitted in a whisper. "Like something inside me died with them and I will never be whole again." Vincent shifted closer and slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, he put his arm around her shoulders. Adelaide stiffened for just a moment, then allowed herself to lean into his warmth, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "You are not broken," Vincent said firmly. "You are hurt and you are grieving, and those are normal responses to terrible circumstances. But hurt and broken are not the same thing. You are still here, still living and working and trying to make a life for yourself. That takes strength, Adelaide, not weakness." They sat like that for a long while, Vincent holding her while she cried quietly for the family she had lost, and the life that had been stolen from her. When the tears finally subsided, Adelaide felt wrung out but also oddly lighter, as if some of the weight she had been carrying had been shared and become slightly less crushing. "Thank you," she said softly, not moving from the circle of his arm. "You do not have to thank me," Vincent replied. "I just wish I could do more." Adelaide pulled back slightly to look at him, seeing the sincerity in his green eyes. "You have done more than you know," she said. "I have not told anyone about the fire or the scars. I have been so focused on keeping it all hidden that I forgot what it felt like to be honest with someone." "Your secrets are safe with me," Vincent assured her. "And your scars, whether anyone sees them or not, do not define you. They are part of your story, but they are not the whole story." The rest of the day passed in a blur of quiet conversation and comfortable silences. By the time Vincent walked Adelaide back to her boarding room that evening, something fundamental had shifted in their relationship. The walls Adelaide had so carefully constructed had developed cracks, and while that terrified her, it also filled her with a tentative hope that maybe, just maybe, she could find a way to live again instead of merely surviving. As the summer progressed, Adelaide and Vincent grew closer, though Adelaide still struggled with her fears and insecurities. Vincent was patient, never pushing her further than she was ready to go, but also gently encouraging her to step outside her comfort zone in small ways. One evening in late July, as they sat by the Pecos River watching the sunset, Vincent asked her a question that had clearly been on his mind for some time. "Would you ever consider showing me your scars?" Adelaide's immediate reaction was panic, a visceral need to refuse and shut down the conversation entirely. But she forced herself to take a breath and really consider what he was asking and why. "I do not want you to see me differently," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I do not want you to look at me with pity or disgust." "Adelaide," Vincent said, turning to face her fully. I have seen you nearly every day for months now. I have seen you work hard without complaint in unbearable heat. I have seen you be kind to Mrs. Wells even when you are exhausted. I have seen you be brave enough to share your pain with me when it would have been easier to keep hiding. Those things have shaped how I see you, not the condition of your skin. But they are awful, Adelaide said, tears threatening again. The scars are raised and discolored, and they cover most of my forearms. They are hideous. They are not hideous, Vincent said with certainty. They are evidence that you survived something terrible. They show that you fought and you lived when it would have been so easy to give up. There is nothing shameful about that. Adelaide wanted to believe him, but the fear was still there, sharp and insistent. What if you are wrong? What if you see them and you realize you do not want to be around me anymore? Vincent reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm and steady around hers. I am not going to lie and say that seeing evidence of your pain will not affect me. But it will affect me because I care about you and I hate that you went through something so traumatic, not because I will suddenly find you less valuable or less beautiful. Those are two very different things. Beautiful. Adelaide almost laughed at the word. She had not felt beautiful since before the fire, had not even allowed herself to think in those terms. Beauty seemed like a luxury for people whose lives had not been shattered, not for women carrying the weight of grief and guilt that she bore. But Vincent was looking at her with such open honesty that Adelaide found herself slowly, carefully, beginning to roll up the sleeve on her right arm. Her hands shook as she revealed inch after inch of scarred flesh, the puckered skin a stark contrast to the smooth, unblemished skin of her upper arm where the flames had not reached. Vincent watched in silence, his expression serious but not shocked or disgusted as she had feared. When the sleeve was finally rolled up past her elbow, revealing the full extent of the damage, Adelaide could not bear to look at him. She stared down at her lap, waiting for the inevitable moment when he would make some excuse and leave. But Vincent did not leave. Instead, he gently took her arm in his hands, his touch feather light as he traced his fingers over the raised scars. "Does it hurt?" he asked quietly. "Not anymore," Adelaide said, her voice catching. "Sometimes the skin feels tight, and it is more sensitive to temperature than it used to be, but the pain is mostly gone now." "I am glad you do not have to live with constant pain," Vincent said, still examining her arm with a tenderness that made Adelaide's heart ache. "Thank you for trusting me enough to show me." "You are not repulsed?" Adelaide asked, finally finding the courage to look at his face. Vincent met her gaze steadily. "No, Adelaide, I am heartbroken that you had to endure such suffering, but I am not repulsed. These scars are part of you, part of your history, but they do not diminish who you are as a person. You are still the same woman I have come to care for deeply." The sincerity in his voice broke something open inside Adelaide, and before she could overthink it, she found herself leaning forward and pressing her forehead against his shoulder. Vincent wrapped his arms around her, holding her close while the last rays of sunlight painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. "You are beautiful exactly as you are," Vincent murmured into her hair. "Scars and all, I hope someday you will be able to see yourself the way I see you." Adelaide could not form words to respond, so she simply held on to him, allowing herself to believe, if only for this moment, that maybe he was right. Maybe she was more than her scars, more than her grief, more than the guilt that had been consuming her for months. As summer faded into autumn, Adelaide began to slowly let go of some of the shame she had been carrying. She did not suddenly start wearing short sleeves, was not ready for that kind of public vulnerability, but she stopped hiding quite so much when she was alone with Vincent. He had seen her at her most broken and had not turned away, and that knowledge gave her a courage she had not known she still possessed. One crisp October morning, Mrs. Wells mentioned that the ranch would be hosting a harvest dance in a few weeks, a tradition that brought together people from all over the county. "I do hope you will come, Adelaide," she said warmly. "It would do you good to enjoy yourself with people your own age." Adelaide's first instinct was to refuse, but then she thought of Vincent and how patient he had been with her, how he had never asked her to be anything other than herself. Maybe it was time to take another small step forward. "I would like that," Adelaide said, surprising both Mrs. Wells and herself, "though I do not have anything appropriate to wear to a dance." "Nonsense," Mrs. Wells said with a dismissive wave. "You are a seamstress. I have plenty of fabric and you have time to make yourself something lovely. I insist you use whatever materials you need. Consider it a bonus for all your hard work." Over the next 2 weeks, Adelaide threw herself into creating a dress unlike anything she had made before. She chose a deep blue fabric that reminded her of the evening sky and designed it with long sleeves that would keep her comfortable while still being fashionable. She added delicate embroidery at the cuffs and neckline, small flowers that seemed to bloom across the fabric. Vincent had not yet asked her to attend the dance with him, and Adelaide found herself both hoping he would and fearing what it would mean if he did. Would people talk? Would they judge him for choosing to be with someone like her? The questions circled in her mind as she worked on the dress, her needle flying through the fabric with practiced precision. The day before the dance, Adelaide was finishing the final touches on her dress when Vincent appeared at the door of the sewing room. "Mrs. Wells said I could find you here," he said, looking slightly nervous. "Do you have a minute?" "Of course," Adelaide said, setting down her needle and giving him her full attention. Vincent stepped into the room, turning his hat in his hands in that way he did when he was uncertain about something. "I was wondering if you would do me the honor of accompanying me to the dance tomorrow night," he said formally. "I know it might be difficult for you, being around so many people, but I promise I will stay by your side the entire time if that would make it easier." Adelaide felt a smile spread across her face, genuine and unreserved in a way that had become more common in recent weeks. "I would love to go with you," she said. "I have been hoping you would ask." Relief flooded Vincent's features. "Thank goodness," he said with a laugh. "I was worried you might say no. I have been working up the courage to ask you for the past week." "You were nervous?" Adelaide asked, surprised. Vincent always seemed so confident and self-assured. "Of course I was nervous," Vincent admitted. "You are important to me, Adelaide. I did not want to presume or make you uncomfortable by asking for something you might not be ready for." Adelaide stood and crossed the room to stand in front of him, emboldened by his vulnerability. "I am ready," she said softly. "Or at least, I am ready to try. You have helped me realize that I do not want to spend the rest of my life hiding from the world. I want to live again, really live, and I want to do that with you by my side if you are willing." Vincent reached out and gently cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing across her cheekbones. "I am more than willing," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Adelaide Voss, you have become the most important person in my life. I know we have only known each other for a few months, but in that time, you have changed everything for me. I do not just want to be by your side, I want to build a life with you if you will have me." Adelaide's breath caught in her throat. Was he saying what she thought he was saying? "Vincent, I am not asking you to marry me right this moment," Vincent clarified, seeing the panic that must have shown on her face. "I know we both have healing to do and time we need to spend getting to know each other even better. But I am telling you my intentions, Adelaide. I am telling you that when you are ready, if you are ever ready, I want to make a future with you. A real future, with a home and a family and all the things that make life worth living. Tears filled Adelaide's eyes, but for once they were tears of joy rather than grief. "I want that too," she whispered. "I did not think I could ever want that again after losing my family, but you have shown me that I am capable of more than just surviving. You have shown me that I deserve to be happy, even with all my scars and all my baggage." Vincent leaned down and pressed his forehead against hers, a gesture that had become intimate and familiar between them. "We all have scars, Adelaide. Some are just more visible than others, but scars mean we have survived, and survival is the first step toward truly living." They stood like that for a long moment, wrapped in each other's presence and the promise of a future neither of them had dared to hope for just a few months earlier. The night of the harvest dance arrived with clear skies and unseasonably warm weather. Adelaide dressed carefully in her new blue gown, her hands only shaking slightly as she fastened the tiny buttons that ran up the back. She had left her hair down, something she rarely did, and it fell in soft waves past her shoulders. When she descended the stairs to meet Vincent, who was waiting in the boarding house parlor, she saw his eyes widen with appreciation. "Adelaide," he breathed, standing up quickly, "you look absolutely stunning." Adelaide felt heat rise to her cheeks, still not entirely comfortable with compliments but learning to accept them with grace. "Thank you," she said. "You look very handsome yourself." Vincent had clearly made an effort as well, wearing clean black trousers and a crisp white shirt with a black vest. His dark hair was neatly combed back, though Adelaide knew it would probably fall forward over his forehead by the end of the night, a detail she found endearing. The ride to the Wells Ranch was filled with comfortable conversation, though Adelaide could feel nervousness building in her stomach as they drew closer. She had not been to a social gathering since before the fire, and the thought of being surrounded by so many people made her anxious. But Vincent must have sensed her growing tension because he reached over and squeezed her hand reassuringly. "Remember, we can leave whenever you want," he said. "There is no pressure to stay if it becomes too much." Adelaide nodded, drawing strength from his steady presence. "I am going to try," she said. "That is all I can promise." "That is all anyone can ask," Vincent assured her. The ranch was transformed for the dance. Lanterns hung from the trees, casting a warm, golden glow over the area, and long tables were set up with food and drinks. A small group of musicians was playing lively music, and already several couples were dancing in the cleared space in front of the barn. Mrs. Wells spotted them immediately and hurried over, beaming with pleasure. "Adelaide, you look absolutely lovely," she exclaimed. "That dress is exquisite. You should be very proud of your work." "Thank you, Mrs. Wells," Adelaide said, feeling some of her anxiety ease in the face of the older woman's genuine warmth. "You two go enjoy yourselves," Mrs. Wells said, shooing them toward the dance floor. "There is plenty of food, and the dancing will go on until late." Vincent led Adelaide to a spot near the edge of the dancing area, not quite in the thick of things but close enough to feel part of the celebration. "Would you like to dance?" he asked, extending his hand. Adelaide hesitated only briefly before placing her hand in his. She had not danced since she was a girl, and she was certain she would be clumsy and awkward, but the hopeful expression on Vincent's face made her willing to try. He pulled her into his arms, one hand resting on her waist while the other held her hand gently. They began to move to the music, and while Adelaide did stumble a few times, Vincent guided her patiently, never making her feel foolish for her mistakes. "You are doing wonderfully," he murmured as they swayed together. "I am stepping on your feet," Adelaide pointed out with a self-deprecating laugh. "I have sturdy boots," Vincent said with a grin. "I can handle it." As the evening wore on, Adelaide found herself relaxing more and more. People came up to greet them, and while a few gave her curious looks, no one was outright rude or intrusive. Vincent stayed close, his presence a constant comfort, and Adelaide began to remember what it felt like to simply enjoy being alive. They took a break from dancing to get some food, piling their plates high with roasted chicken, fresh bread, and various vegetable dishes. They found a quiet spot under a large oak tree and sat down to eat, watching the festivities from a comfortable distance. "Are you having a good time?" Vincent asked between bites. "I am," Adelaide admitted, somewhat surprised by how much she meant it. "I did not think I would be able to enjoy something like this, but being here with you makes it bearable. More than bearable, actually. It makes it good." Vincent's smile was radiant. "I am glad," he said. "You deserve to have good things in your life, Adelaide. You deserve joy and laughter and all the simple pleasures that make life worthwhile." Adelaide set down her plate and turned to face him fully. The lantern light played across his features, highlighting the strong line of his jaw and the warmth in his green eyes. "I love you," she said suddenly, the words escaping before she could second-guess them. "I did not think I was capable of feeling this way again, but I do. I love you, Vincent Reeves, and I want that future you talked about. Maybe not tomorrow or even next month, but someday. I want to build a life with you." Vincent set down his own plate and pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. "I love you too," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I have loved you for weeks now, maybe even longer. You are the bravest, strongest, most beautiful woman I have ever met, and I count myself lucky every day that you let me into your life." Adelaide pulled back just enough to look into his eyes. "Will you kiss me?" she asked softly. In answer, Vincent cupped her face in his hands and lowered his lips to hers in a kiss that was tender and sweet and full of promise. Adelaide melted into it, letting herself feel everything she had been holding back, love and hope and desire all mingling together in a way that felt both terrifying and wonderful. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Vincent rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "I know I said I would wait, but Adelaide, I do not want to wait. I want to start our life together now. Marry me and let me spend the rest of my days showing you how loved and valued you are." Adelaide's heart was racing, but this time it was with excitement rather than fear. "Yes," she said, laughing through the tears that were streaming down her face. "Yes, I will marry you." Vincent let out a whoop of joy that drew the attention of several nearby dancers, but neither of them cared. He stood and pulled Adelaide to her feet, spinning her around in a circle while she laughed, her blue skirts swirling around her legs. Mrs. Wells appeared moments later, clearly having witnessed at least part of what had transpired. "I take it congratulations are in order?" she asked, her eyes twinkling with pleasure. "Adelaide has agreed to marry me," Vincent announced, still grinning like a fool. "Wonderful," Mrs. Wells exclaimed, pulling Adelaide into a warm hug. "I could not be happier for you both. You make a lovely couple, and you both deserve all the happiness in the world." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of well wishes and celebration. Adelaide found herself pulled into conversations with people she barely knew, all offering their congratulations and genuine happiness for her impending marriage. The acceptance and warmth she received from the community surprised her, and she realized that she had been so focused on her own pain and shame that she had not allowed herself to see the potential for connection and belonging that existed all around her. As the night drew to a close and Vincent drove her back to town, Adelaide felt a sense of peace that had eluded her for months. She was still grieving for her family, and she suspected that grief would remain with her in some form for the rest of her life. but it no longer defined her entirely. She was more than her loss, more than her scars. She was a woman capable of loving and being loved, capable of building a new life even after everything had been destroyed. "When should we get married?" Vincent asked as they neared the boarding house. "Soon," Adelaide said without hesitation. "I do not see any reason to wait. We know what we want, and life is too short and too uncertain to postpone happiness." "Next month, then," Vincent suggested. "That will give us time to make arrangements and find a place to live." Mr. Wells mentioned there is a small house on the ranch property that he would be willing to rent to us for a fair price. It needs some work, but it could be made comfortable. "That sounds perfect," Adelaide said, already imagining making a home with Vincent, filling empty rooms with laughter and love. When they reached her boarding house, Vincent walked her to the door and kissed her good night, a lingering kiss full of promise and affection. "I will see you tomorrow," he said. "We have a lot of planning to do." "Tomorrow," Adelaide agreed, watching as he mounted his horse and rode off into the night. She climbed the stairs to her room, her heart light and her mind buzzing with plans and possibilities. As she changed out of her blue dress and prepared for bed, Adelaide caught sight of her reflection in the small mirror above her washstand. For the first time in months, she did not immediately look away or focus on her flaws. Instead, she saw a woman who had survived terrible tragedy and was learning to live again. She saw strength in the set of her jaw and hope in her eyes. And when she looked down at her scarred forearms, she tried to see them the way Vincent did, not as marks of shame but as evidence of survival. The scars were still there and always would be, but they no longer seemed quite so hideous. They were simply part of her story, part of what had shaped her into the woman she was today. And that woman was loved, was valued, was beautiful exactly as she was. The next month passed in a flurry of activity. Adelaide gave notice at her boarding house and worked with Vincent to prepare their future home. The small house on the ranch property was indeed in need of significant repairs, but with Vincent's carpentry skills and Adelaide's eye for making a space comfortable, it slowly transformed into something that felt like theirs. Mrs. Wells helped Adelaide sew a simple wedding dress in cream-colored fabric with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. For this dress, Adelaide chose sleeves that ended just below the elbow, a compromise that felt like a significant step forward. She would still wear long gloves during the ceremony, but the fact that she was willing to have her lower arms visible at all was progress. The wedding was small and intimate, held at the church in Pecos on a cool November morning. Only a handful of people attended the Wells family. A few ranch hands, including Vincent's closest friend, and the boarding house owner who had been kind to Adelaide during her early days in town. As Adelaide walked down the short aisle toward where Vincent stood waiting, she felt none of the fear or anxiety she might have expected. Instead, there was only certainty and joy. Vincent looked handsome in his best suit, his green eyes locked on her with an intensity that made her heart race. The ceremony was brief and simple, the pastor speaking about love and commitment and the sacred bond of marriage. When it came time for vows, Vincent took Adelaide's gloved hands in his and spoke with a sincerity that brought tears to her eyes. "Adelaide, I vow to love you and honor you for all the days of my life. I vow to be your partner in joy and in sorrow, in sickness and in health. I vow to see you, truly see you always, and to remind you of your worth whenever you forget. You are the greatest gift I have ever received, and I will spend my life being worthy of the trust you have placed in me." Adelaide's voice shook only slightly as she spoke her own vows. "Vincent, I vow to love you with all that I am and all that I will become. I vow to be honest with you, to let you see all of me, even the parts that frighten me. I vow to build a life with you filled with laughter and hope, and the simple joys that make each day worthwhile. You have shown me that I am more than my past, more than my pain, and I will spend my life showing you the same truth. I love you, and I choose you today and always." When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, Vincent kissed Adelaide with a tenderness that felt like a promise, and Adelaide kissed him back with all the love and gratitude that filled her heart. The small reception was held at the ranch, with food and music and genuine celebration. As Adelaide danced with her new husband, her cream-colored dress swirling around her and the afternoon sun warm on her face, she thought about how far she had come in the past 6 months. She had arrived in Pecos broken and alone, convinced that happiness was no longer possible for someone like her. But Vincent had shown her differently. He had seen past her carefully constructed walls to the woman underneath, and he had loved that woman fiercely and without reservation. As winter settled over Texas, Adelaide and Vincent began their married life in earnest. The little house on the ranch property became a true home, filled with small touches that reflected both of their personalities. Adelaide hung curtains she had sewn herself and arranged wildflowers in jars on the windowsills. Vincent built them a solid dining table and chairs, and he constructed shelves where Adelaide could store her sewing supplies and the few precious books she owned. They fell into comfortable routines, Vincent working with the horses during the day while Adelaide continued her seamstress work for Mrs. Wells and other women in town. In the evenings, they would sit together on the small porch Vincent had built, watching the sun set over the endless Texas plains and talking about everything and nothing. Adelaide found herself laughing more, the sound becoming natural and frequent rather than rare and surprising. Vincent had a gift for finding humor in everyday situations, and his easy nature helped balance out Adelaide's more serious tendencies. They were different in many ways, but those differences complemented rather than clashed, creating a partnership that felt balanced and right. One evening in early December, as they sat by the fireplace in their small parlor, Vincent reached over and gently took Adelaide's hand. "I have been thinking," he said carefully, "about your scars." Adelaide tensed slightly, old anxieties flaring despite the months of healing and acceptance. "What about them?" "I was thinking that maybe, if you are comfortable with it, you might consider wearing shorter sleeves sometimes when we are at home," Vincent suggested gently. "Not because I think you should or because I want to change you, but because it is so hot here, even in winter, and I hate seeing you uncomfortable in long sleeves when it is just the two of us." Adelaide looked down at her arms, currently covered by the long sleeves she still habitually wore. "I do not know if I am ready for that," she admitted. "Even with you, even after everything, I still feel self-conscious." "That is all right," Vincent assured her. "It was just a thought. But Adelaide, I need you to understand something. Your scars do not bother me at all. When I look at your arms, I do not see ugliness or damage. I see the woman I love, the woman who survived something terrible and is brave enough to keep living despite the pain. I see strength and resilience and beauty. That is all I have ever seen." Adelaide felt tears prick at her eyes, moved by his words and his endless patience. "Can I think about it?" she asked. "Of course," Vincent said, pulling her close. "Take all the time you need. I am not going anywhere." Over the next few weeks, Adelaide found herself slowly testing the waters of this new vulnerability. She started by rolling up her sleeves when she was cooking, just to her elbows, telling herself it was practical rather than symbolic. Then one evening, she wore a dress with 3/4 sleeves while she and Vincent ate dinner together, her heart pounding even though he was the only person who would see. Vincent never commented on these small changes. never made a big deal out of her gradual willingness to let herself be seen. He simply loved her, steadily and without condition, and that quiet acceptance gave Adelaide the courage to continue pushing past her fears. By the time spring arrived, Adelaide found that she could spend entire evenings at home with her forearms bare, the scarred skin exposed to the air without the constant need to hide. It still felt vulnerable and sometimes uncomfortable, but it also felt like freedom. She was reclaiming her body, reclaiming her right to exist without shame. In April, Adelaide realized she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with a complex mix of emotions. Joy at the thought of bringing a child into the world with Vincent, but also fear that she might not be a good mother given all that she had lost and all the ways she still felt broken. When she told Vincent the news, he swept her up in his arms with a whoop of delight, spinning her around until she was laughing and telling him to put her down before he made her dizzy. "We are going to have a baby," he kept repeating, as if saying it aloud would make it more real. "Adelaide, we are going to be parents. Are you happy?" Adelaide asked, needing the reassurance. "Happy," Vincent repeated, setting her down but keeping his hands on her waist. "Adelaide, I am beyond happy. This is everything I have ever wanted. A home, a wife I love more than anything, and now a child. You have given me a family, something I never thought I would have after leaving my father's house all those years ago." "I am scared," Adelaide admitted. "What if I am not a good mother? What if I cannot protect our child the way I could not protect my family?" Vincent's expression grew serious, and he guided her to sit down on their small sofa, settling beside her and taking both her hands in his. "Adelaide, what happened to your family was a tragedy, but it was not your fault. You cannot protect people from every possible danger in the world, and trying to do so will only drive you to madness. All we can do is love our child, teach them the best we can, and trust that we are doing enough." "What if it is not enough?" Adelaide whispered. "Then we will deal with whatever comes together," Vincent said firmly. "You are not alone anymore, Adelaide. We are a team, you and me, and we are going to raise this child together. You do not have to carry every burden by yourself." His words soothed some of Adelaide's fears, though she knew the anxiety would probably resurface throughout the pregnancy. But having Vincent by her side, steady and supportive, made everything feel more manageable. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though the summer heat was brutal, and Adelaide found herself grateful that she had become comfortable wearing lighter clothing at home. She continued her sewing work for as long as she could, though Mrs. Wells eventually insisted she take time to rest and prepare for the baby's arrival. Vincent was attentive and caring throughout, taking on extra responsibilities around their home and making sure Adelaide had everything she needed. He built a beautiful cradle out of smooth pine, sanding it until there were no rough edges that could harm delicate baby skin. Adelaide sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her needle flying as she created a small wardrobe for the child they would soon meet. On a warm evening in late October, just over a year after Adelaide had first arrived in Pecos, their son was born. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Adelaide was certain she would not survive it, but Vincent stayed by her side through all of it, holding her hand and offering words of encouragement when she felt like giving up. When the midwife finally placed the squalling infant in Adelaide's arms, Adelaide felt her heart expand in a way she had not thought possible. The baby was small and red-faced and absolutely perfect, with a shock of dark hair like his father and eyes that would probably turn green as he grew older. "He is beautiful," Vincent said, his voice choked with emotion as he looked down at his son. "Adelaide, he is perfect. What should we name him?" Adelaide asked, exhausted but filled with a joy so profound it almost hurt. Vincent thought for a moment, then said, "What about Thomas?" "It was my grandfather's name, the only member of my family who ever truly understood me. I would like to honor his memory." "Thomas Reeves," Adelaide said softly, testing the name. "I like it. Hello, Thomas. Welcome to the world, little one." The first few months of parenthood were exhausting and overwhelming in equal measure. Thomas was a fussy baby who did not sleep well and seemed to cry more often than not. Adelaide found herself awake at all hours, nursing and walking and trying desperately to soothe her unhappy infant while questioning every decision she made. Vincent did his best to help, taking Thomas for walks when Adelaide was too tired to move, and handling the middle-of-the-night diaper changes without complaint. They were both running on far too little sleep, but there were moments of pure magic too. When Thomas would finally settle down and look up at them with wide, wondering eyes, or when Adelaide would wake to find Vincent asleep in the rocking chair with their son nestled against his chest. As winter approached and Thomas began to grow and develop, Adelaide found herself thinking about her family more often. She wished her parents could have met their grandson, wished her younger brother could have been an uncle. The grief was still there, would probably always be there in some form, but it had softened around the edges. She could remember her family now with love and gratitude for the time they had shared, rather than being consumed by guilt and regret over their loss. One snowy December evening, as Adelaide sat by the fire nursing Thomas, Vincent came in from checking on the horses and shook the snow from his coat. "It is really coming down out there," he said, hanging his coat by the door and coming to sit beside Adelaide. "We will probably be snowed in for a few days." "Good thing we stocked up on supplies," Adelaide said, looking down at Thomas, who was nursing contentedly, his tiny hand resting against her breast. Vincent reached over and gently stroked his son's head, his expression tender. "I never imagined I could be this happy," he said quietly. "A year ago, I was just drifting, working and moving with no real purpose or direction. And now I have you and Thomas in this home we have built together. It feels almost too good to be true." "It is true, though," Adelaide said, reaching out with her free hand to intertwine her fingers with his. "This is our life, the life we chose and built together. We deserve this happiness, Vincent, both of us." "You are right," Vincent agreed, leaning over to kiss her forehead. "Sometimes I just need the reminder that good things can actually last, that they do not always get ripped away." Adelaide understood that fear intimately. After losing so much, it was hard to trust in the permanence of happiness, hard to believe that the life they had built would not somehow be destroyed. But every day that passed, every small joy and even every challenge they faced together helped prove that this was real and lasting. As the years passed, Adelaide and Vincent's life continued to unfold in ways both expected and surprising. Thomas grew into a curious, energetic toddler who kept them constantly on their toes. He inherited his father's easy charm and his mother's thoughtful nature, along with an apparent fascination with horses that delighted Vincent to no end. When Thomas was 2 years old, Adelaide became pregnant again. This time she felt more confident in her abilities as a mother, though she still had moments of anxiety and doubt. Their daughter was born in the spring of 1881, a tiny, perfect girl with Adelaide's dark hair and a set of lungs that could wake the entire household. They named her Rose, after Adelaide's mother, and Adelaide cried when Vincent suggested it, touched that he wanted to honor the family she had lost. Rose was a different baby than Thomas had been, easier in some ways and more challenging in others. But Adelaide and Vincent had learned from their first parenting experience and approached the sleepless nights and constant demands with more patience and less panic. Adelaide's sewing business continued to grow, and she became known throughout Pecos for her skill and artistry. She took on more complex projects, wedding dresses and fancy gowns for special occasions, clothing that required the kind of detailed work she excelled at. The income she brought in helped supplement Vincent's earnings from the ranch, allowing them to make improvements to their home and save money for their children's futures. As Adelaide's reputation grew, so did her confidence. She found herself wearing shorter sleeves more often, even in public, though she still had days where the old insecurities would resurface, and she would reach for her long-sleeved dresses. But those days became less frequent over time, and Adelaide began to realize that most people barely noticed her scars, and those who did rarely commented on them. On the occasions when someone did ask about the scarring, Adelaide had learned to respond with a simple, factual explanation. She had been in a fire, and these were the results. She no longer felt the need to apologize or hide, no longer carried the weight of shame that had once been so crushing. Vincent continued to work with horses, his reputation as a skilled trainer spreading throughout the region. People would travel from miles away to have him work with difficult or traumatized animals, knowing that his patient, intuitive approach could reach horses that others had given up on as untrainable. Watching Vincent with the horses always moved Adelaide. There was something beautiful about his gentleness, the way he could calm a frightened animal with just his voice and his steady presence. She saw parallels between how he worked with horses and how he had approached her when they first met, with patience and respect, giving space when needed but always remaining constant and reliable. The children thrived, growing healthy and happy in the warmth of their parents' love. Thomas, at 4 years old, was already following his father around the ranch, his small hands mimicking Vincent's movements as he learned to care for the horses. Rose, at 2, was more interested in staying close to Adelaide, watching intently as her mother worked on various sewing projects, and occasionally being allowed to hold a piece of fabric or pass Adelaide a spool of thread. On a summer evening in 1883, the family sat together on their porch watching the sun set. Thomas was showing Rose how to catch fireflies, their laughter ringing out in the warm air. Vincent had his arm around Adelaide's shoulders, and she leaned into him comfortably, feeling completely at peace. "Do you ever miss Missouri?" Vincent asked, breaking the comfortable silence. Adelaide considered the question. "Sometimes," she admitted. "I miss the green hills and the way spring would arrive earlier than it does here. But Missouri was a different life, a different Adelaide. That girl who grew up there died in the fire along with her family. The woman I am now was born here in Texas with you. This is my home now, the only home that matters." "I am glad you feel that way," Vincent said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Though I am sorry for the pain that brought you here." "I am not," Adelaide said, surprising herself with the truth of the statement. "I do not mean I am glad my family died, because I will grieve them for the rest of my life. But if that fire had not happened, I never would have come to Pecos. I never would have met you or built this life we have. And as much as I miss my family, I cannot regret the path that led me to this moment, to this life with you and our children." Vincent tightened his arm around her. "You have become so strong," he said with admiration. "Stronger than you give yourself credit for." "We have become strong," Adelaide corrected. "You have been my partner in every way that matters, Vincent. I could not have healed without you, could not have learned to live again without your patience and your love. You saved me in so many ways." "And you saved me right back," Vincent said. "I was drifting before I met you, going through the motions of living without really having a life. You gave me purpose and family and a reason to plant roots. We saved each other, Adelaide. That is what partners do. As the last rays of sunlight faded and the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Adelaide reflected on how far she had come. The scars on her arms were still there, still visible when she wore short sleeves as she was doing now on this warm evening, but they no longer defined her. They were simply part of her story, part of the journey that had brought her to this porch, to this family, to this life. Thomas came running up with a firefly cupped carefully in his hands, eager to show his parents the treasure he had caught. Rose toddled behind him, her small face lit up with delight. Vincent scooped up both children, one in each arm, and Adelaide laughed as they all tried to look at the glowing insect without squashing it. This was her life now. Not perfect, not without challenges or moments of doubt, but real and full and deeply, profoundly good. She had survived the fire that had taken everything from her, had survived the grief and the guilt that had nearly destroyed her in the aftermath. She had learned to live with her scars, both visible and invisible, and had found a man who loved her not despite those scars but with full acceptance of every part of her. "I love you," Adelaide said suddenly, looking at Vincent over their children's heads. "I love you too," Vincent replied, his green eyes warm with affection. "Today and always." As the firefly flew away from Thomas's hands and disappeared into the night, Adelaide made a silent promise to herself and to her lost family. She would live fully and joyfully, honoring their memory not through grief and guilt, but through the life she built. She would raise her children to be kind and brave, to face challenges with grace, and to love without reservation. She would continue to work on healing, knowing that it was an ongoing process rather than a destination. And she would love Vincent with everything she had, grateful every day for the chance encounter that had brought them together, for his patience in helping her see her own worth, and for the family they had created together. The years continued to unfold, bringing both joys and sorrows as all lives do. There were lean years when drought made ranching difficult, and there were prosperous years when everything seemed to go right. Adelaide and Vincent faced each challenge together, their partnership growing stronger with each passing season. When Thomas was 8 and Rose was 6, Adelaide became pregnant once more. This pregnancy was harder on her body than the previous two had been, and there were moments when she worried about complications. But their second daughter was born healthy and strong in the fall of 1887, a tiny girl with Vincent's green eyes from the very start. They named her Clara, and she was a happy baby who seemed to smile more than she cried. Thomas and Rose adored their little sister, competing for who could make her laugh and who could help their mother the most with her care. As the children grew, Adelaide found herself sharing more about her past with them. She told them about their grandparents and uncle, about the farm where she had grown up and the fire that had changed everything. She showed them her scars and explained where they had come from, wanting them to understand that difficult things happen in life, but that survival is possible and even beautiful in its own way. Thomas, at 10 years old, had listened with serious attention and then asked, "Did it hurt?" "Yes," Adelaide had answered honestly. "It hurt terribly at the time and it hurt for a long time after, but the pain eventually faded and what was left was just the scars and the memories." "I think your scars are beautiful," Rose had said with the earnest sincerity of an 8-year-old. "They look like flower petals, all swirled together." Adelaide had been moved to tears by her daughter's words, by the way her children saw her scars as just another part of their mother rather than something shameful or ugly. This was Vincent's influence, she knew. The way he had always treated her scars as unremarkable, had always made her feel beautiful and valued exactly as she was. As the children grew older and more independent, Adelaide and Vincent found themselves with more time together, able to recapture some of the easy companionship of their early marriage. They would take evening rides together when Vincent finished work, or they would sit on the porch after the children were in bed, talking about everything and nothing while the stars wheeled overhead. "You ever wish things had been different?" Vincent asked one night, the question coming out of nowhere during a comfortable silence. "Different how?" Adelaide asked, turning to look at him in the dim light from the lantern. "If your family had not died, if you had never come to Pecos, you might have married someone from your hometown, someone without a troubled past and a better financial situation," Vincent said. And Adelaide could hear the old insecurity in his voice, the fear that somehow he was not enough. "Vincent Reeves, look at me," Adelaide commanded gently. When his eyes met hers, she continued with fierce certainty. "I have never once wished things were different between us. Never. Yes, I wish my family had not died, but I cannot change that, and I cannot live in a world of what-ifs. What I can do is be grateful for what I have right now. And what I have is a husband I love more than I thought possible, 3 beautiful children, and a life that brings me joy every single day. You are enough, Vincent. You have always been enough." "I just want to make sure you are happy," Vincent said softly. "I am happy," Adelaide assured him, reaching over to take his hand. "I am so very happy. Are you happy?" "More than I ever thought I could be," Vincent said, bringing her hand to his lips and pressing a kiss to her scarred wrist, a gesture that never failed to move her. "You and the children are everything to me." "And you are everything to us," Adelaide said. "Never doubt that." As the 1890s arrived, Adelaide and Vincent found themselves in their 30s with older children and a life that had settled into comfortable patterns. Thomas, now a young man of 13, was learning the horse training trade from his father and showing real promise. Rose, at 11, had inherited her mother's skill with a needle and spent hours working on increasingly complex embroidery projects. And Clara, now 6, was the wild child of the family, always exploring and getting into minor trouble with a charming smile that made it hard to stay angry with her. The ranch continued to thrive, and the Wells family had become more like extended family to Adelaide and Vincent. When Mrs. Wells passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1893, Adelaide and Vincent felt the loss deeply, and they made sure to check on Mr. Wells regularly, knowing how hard the loneliness must be for him after so many years of marriage. Adelaide's sewing business had expanded to the point where she was training younger women in the art of dressmaking, passing on her skills to a new generation. She found she enjoyed teaching, like seeing her students' faces light up when they mastered a difficult technique or completed a project they were proud of. She no longer wore long sleeves unless the weather was genuinely cool enough to warrant them. Her scars were visible whenever she wore short sleeves or pushed her sleeves up to work, and while some people still stared or asked questions, Adelaide had learned to handle such moments with grace and honesty. The scars were part of her story, and she was no longer ashamed of that story. One spring day in 1895, Adelaide was working in her sewing room when Thomas came in, looking nervous and excited in equal measure. "Ma, Pa, I need to talk to you both," he said. Vincent was mending a harness at the kitchen table, and he looked up with interest. "What is on your mind, son?" Thomas took a deep breath. "I have been courting Sarah Mitchell for a few months now, and I would like to ask her to marry me, but I wanted to get your blessing first." Adelaide felt her eyes fill with tears. Her son was 18 now, a man grown, and it made sense that he would be thinking about marriage. But part of her heart ached at how quickly the time had passed, how the tiny baby she had held in her arms seemed to have grown into an adult in the blink of an eye. Sarah is a lovely girl, Adelaide said, thinking of the blacksmith's daughter who had indeed been spending a lot of time at their home lately. Does she make you happy? She does, Thomas said with a smile that left no doubt about his feelings. She makes me laugh and she understands me and I can be myself around her without pretending to be something I am not. Kind of like you and Pa, I guess. Vincent stood and walked over to his son, placing a hand on Thomas's shoulder. Then you have my blessing, he said gruffly. You are a good man, Thomas, and I am proud of you. Sarah would be lucky to have you, and I hope she says yes. Thank you, Pa, Thomas said, clearly relieved. Ma, of course you have my blessing, Adelaide said, going to hug her son tightly. I am so happy for you, Thomas. Love is precious, and when you find it, you should hold on to it with both hands. Thomas proposed to Sarah the following week, and she accepted enthusiastically. The wedding was planned for the fall, giving everyone time to prepare. Adelaide threw herself into creating the most beautiful wedding dress she had ever made, pouring all her love for her son and her happiness for his future into every stitch. The wedding day arrived with perfect autumn weather, cool and clear with a brilliant blue sky. Adelaide stood beside Vincent in the church, watching their son marry the woman he loved, and she found herself thinking back to her own wedding nearly 18 years earlier. She and Vincent had been so young then, so unsure of what the future would hold, but they had built something beautiful together through patience and love and mutual support. As Thomas and Sarah exchanged vows, Adelaide felt Vincent's hand find hers, their fingers intertwining in a gesture that had become automatic over the years. She glanced at her husband, seeing the tears in his eyes as he watched their son begin his own journey, and she squeezed his hand gently. "We did good," she whispered. "We did," Vincent agreed. "We really did." The years continued to pass, bringing more changes and more joys. Rose married at 19 to a young rancher from a neighboring property, and Adelaide helped her daughter set up her first home just as Mrs. Wells had once helped Adelaide. Clara grew into a spirited young woman who announced at 16 that she had no interest in marrying any time soon, that she wanted to train horses like her father and travel to other ranches to learn different techniques. Vincent supported Clara's ambitions, teaching her everything he knew and introducing her to other trainers who could expand her education. Adelaide was proud of her youngest daughter's independence, even though she worried about the challenges Clara might face as a woman in a male-dominated profession. As Adelaide and Vincent entered their 40s, they found themselves grandparents to Thomas's 3 children and Rose's 2. The house that had once been filled with their own children's noise now echoed with the sounds of grandchildren visiting, and Adelaide delighted in the role of grandmother, able to enjoy the sweet moments and hand the children back to their parents when they got cranky. One evening in the late summer of 1899, Adelaide and Vincent were sitting on their porch as they had done countless times over the years. The sun was setting in a blaze of orange and pink, and the air was finally beginning to cool after another scorching day. "We have been married for 22 years, Vincent observed, a note of wonder in his voice. 22 years, Adelaide repeated, marveling at how quickly the time had passed. Sometimes it feels like just yesterday that you were giving me rides back to town from the ranch, and other times it feels like we have been together forever." "Do you have any regrets?" Vincent asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Not a single one," Adelaide said firmly. "Well, that is not entirely true. I regret that our children did not get to know my parents and brother. I regret the loss of life and time that the fire stole. But I do not regret anything about our life together, Vincent. These have been the best years of my life, watching our family grow and building this home with you. I would not trade any of it." Even the hard times, Vincent pressed gently. The years when we barely had enough money to get by, the illnesses, the arguments, even those, Adelaide confirmed. The hard times made us stronger, made us appreciate the good times more, and we have always faced everything together. That is what matters. Vincent reached over and pulled her close, and Adelaide settled against his side with the ease of long practice. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear overhead, and Adelaide thought about all the sunsets they had watched from this porch, all the conversations they had shared, all the quiet moments of companionship that had woven their lives together into something strong and beautiful. She looked down at her bare forearms, the scars still visible in the fading light. They were as much a part of her as her brown eyes or her dark hair, just another physical characteristic that told the story of who she was and what she had survived. She no longer tried to hide them, no longer felt shame when people's eyes lingered on the puckered skin. Vincent had been right all those years ago when he had told her she was beautiful exactly as she was. It had taken Adelaide a long time to believe it, to internalize that truth and live it fully. But she had finally reached a place where she could look at herself with acceptance and even appreciation. Her scars were part of her journey, part of the strength she had developed, part of the story that had led her to this porch and this man and this life. As the years moved into the new century, Adelaide and Vincent continued their life together, aging gracefully and remaining each other's greatest support and deepest love. They celebrated milestone after milestone anniversaries and birthdays, new grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren, the successes and struggles of their extended family. When Adelaide was 53, she was diagnosed with a serious illness by the doctor in Pecos. The prognosis was not good, and both she and Vincent knew that their time together was drawing to a close. But instead of despairing, Adelaide chose to face this final challenge the same way she had faced every other difficulty in her life, with grace and courage and honesty. She spent her remaining months making sure everyone she loved knew exactly how much they meant to her. She finished several special sewing projects she had been saving for meaningful moments, creating quilts for each of her children and grandchildren that would serve as tangible reminders of her love long after she was gone. She sat on the porch with Vincent for hours, reminiscing about their life together and making sure he knew that if she could do it all over again, she would choose him every single time. "You saved my life," Adelaide told Vincent one evening, her voice weaker than it had once been but no less sincere. "I was drowning in grief and shame when we met, convinced that I was unworthy of love or happiness. But you saw something in me that I could not see in myself. You never gave up on me, never let me surrender to the darkness. You showed me that I could survive and thrive, that my scars did not define me, that I was beautiful exactly as I was. You gave me back my life, Vincent, and then you made it better than I ever could have imagined." Vincent, his eyes wet with tears, held her hand gently. "And you gave me a reason to stop drifting and start living," he said. "You gave me a home and a family and a purpose. You made me believe that I was worthy of good things, that my past did not have to dictate my future. We saved each other, Adelaide. That is what we have always done." Adelaide passed away peacefully in her sleep on a warm spring morning in 1906, surrounded by the family she and Vincent had built together. She was 54 years old, and she died knowing that she was deeply loved and that her life had mattered. Vincent lived for another 12 years after Adelaide's death, finding solace in his children and grandchildren, and in the work he continued to do with horses. But everyone who knew him could see that part of him had died with Adelaide. that he was simply waiting for the day when he could be reunited with the woman who had been his partner and his greatest love. He kept their home exactly as Adelaide had left it, her sewing supplies still arranged on the shelves she had organized them on, her favorite shawl still draped over the rocking chair where she had loved to sit. And every evening, no matter the weather, Vincent would sit on their porch and watch the sun set, talking to Adelaide as if she were still beside him, telling her about his day and the family news and how much he missed her. When Vincent passed away at the age of 69, his children found a letter he had written to be read after his death. In it, he thanked them for the joy they had brought to his life and reminded them to love fiercely and without reservation, just as he and Adelaide had loved each other. He wrote about the fire that had brought Adelaide to Pecos, about the scars she had hidden under long sleeves, and about the beautiful, brave woman she had been underneath the shame and grief. "Your mother taught me that true love sees beyond the surface to the person underneath," Vincent had written. "She taught me that scars, whether physical or emotional, are nothing to be ashamed of, because they show we have survived, we have endured, we have lived." She was beautiful exactly as she was, scars and all, and I spent every day of our marriage trying to make sure she knew it. Love each other that way. See each other that way. Never let shame or fear keep you from living fully and loving completely. That is the legacy your mother and I want to leave you. The letter was read at Vincent's funeral, and there was not a dry eye in the church. Thomas, now in his late 40s with grandchildren of his own, stood and shared his own memories of his parents' love story, talking about how they had created a home filled with acceptance and support, how they had shown their children what a true partnership looked like. Rose spoke about her mother's courage in overcoming shame and learning to accept herself, and how that example had helped Rose face her own challenges with greater confidence. And Clara, who had become a successful horse trainer in her own right, talked about her father's patience and wisdom, and how both her parents had encouraged her to follow her dreams even when society suggested she should want something different. Adelaide and Vincent were buried side by side in the Pecos cemetery, their graves marked with simple headstones that bore their names, the years of their lives, and a single phrase that captured the essence of their love. Together in life, together in eternity. Their story became part of the Reeves family lore, passed down through generations as an example of what love could be when two broken people found each other and chose to build something beautiful together. The house they had shared remained in the family, eventually passing to Clara, who maintained it lovingly, preserving the porch where her parents had spent so many evenings, and the sewing room where her mother had created beauty with needle and thread. And sometimes, on warm summer evenings, family members would swear they could feel the presence of Adelaide and Vincent on that porch, could almost hear the murmur of their conversation and see the way Vincent would pull Adelaide close while they watched the sun set over the Texas plains they had both loved. The scars Adelaide had once hidden in shame had become part of a love story that spanned decades and touched countless lives. Proof that healing is possible and that beauty exists not despite our wounds, but because of the strength we develop in surviving them. Their love had been simple in many ways, built on small moments of kindness and understanding rather than grand gestures. But it had also been profound, transforming two lost and hurting individuals into partners who faced life's challenges together, and created a family that would carry their values forward for generations to come. They had shown everyone who knew them that love does not require perfection, that scars can be beautiful, and that being seen and accepted exactly as you are is one of the greatest gifts any person can receive. In the end, Adelaide and Vincent's story was one of hope Hope that even after terrible loss, life can be rebuilt. Hope that love can heal the deepest wounds. Hope that two imperfect people can create something perfect together. And their legacy lived on in the children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren who carried their blood and their values, who remembered the cowboy who looked past the scars to see the beautiful woman underneath, and the woman who learned to love herself because someone else loved her first, completely and without reservation, exactly as she was.